Hi everybody, you're listening to Comics and History, episode number 124, part 5, Spotlight on the Spectre during the Ostrander-Mandrake run. And welcome to the show. I am your host, Brian J. Rygate, and class is back in session. And folks, at the end of part 4, I looked at the 0 issue of the Spectre by the team of John Ostrander and Tom Mandrake. And that issue carried a pretty big revelation for the Spectre in that Jim Corrigan learned that he wasn't just the Spectre, he was actually the host for the divine wrath of God. And now, going forward, I really like how Ostrander and Mandrake handled the relationship between Jim Corrigan and the Spectre. It wasn't like the two of them referred to each other in the third person. In fact, in a lot of the following stories, Jim Corrigan would start off by saying the Spectre, and then correct himself and say I, and the Spectre would do likewise. And I want to say it was in the Year 1 annual from 1995, in which readers saw a really neat exchange between Father Richard Kramer and Jim Corrigan, in which Kramer said, Jim, I'm a little confused. When you're the Spectre, is that you? And Jim's response was, yes, Father, I am the Spectre, but there's a little something more, too. So it just went to show the level of care and respect that Mr. Ostrander-Mandrake had for everything which came before. They weren't taking everything which came before and saying, okay, that wasn't the truth or that was wrong. They were just adding another layer to the Spectre's mythology. And really, like I said at the end of part 4, really building upon what Doug Munch and Neil Gaiman have been working on in Spectre stories leading up to the Ostrander-Mandrake run. So now the focus for this episode is the Desecration story arc, which followed the 0 issue. Actually, I just want to backtrack for a second because I mentioned the 1995 Year 1 annual. Those Year 1 annuals were a really great jumping on point for new readers. I mean, yes, the post-crisis timeline was about 10 years old at that point, not really old, and 0 Hour and 0 Month had happened only a year prior, but still DC was looking at bringing in even more new fans, and this was a really nice way of getting new readers up to speed. And so that Year 1 annual, which featured some great artwork by guest artist Pat Olive, did a really nice job of recapping the Ostrander-Mandrake reinterpretation or revisitation of the Spectre's origin in the post-crisis continuity. A couple of really neat revelations. One was that in seeing the first team-up between Dr. Fate and the Spectre, Jim Corrigan revealed that while Fate and the Spectre made great partners, Corrigan really did not like Kent Nelson. And I always thought that was really smart, because certainly while Fate and the Spectre could relate to each other on a certain level, there would certainly be a personality mismatch between Kent Nelson and Jim Corrigan. The other neat revelation, which came at the end of that Year 1 annual, was that Jim Corrigan actually had a sister, and he went back to the Corrigan farmhouse to see her on the day she passed, and unfortunately there was not a happy reunion between brother and sister. As the sister's spirit departed, she basically accused Jim of leaving her, leaving the family. And so she basically said, why should I waste time trying to make up with you when you've been gone for so long? I'm off to enjoy my eternal reward. All right, so now let's get to the desecration story arc. And certainly a couple of seeds were planted by Ostrander and Mandrake before 0 Hour, and that Jim Corrigan had a nice reunion with the spirit of J. Percival Poplansky, aka Percival Pop, the super cop, and Corrigan helped Pop or Poplansky enter the gates of heaven. And then there was that story just before 0 Hour in which the Spectre was reunited with Clarice Winston. She was withered, aged. She had tried to end her life on more than one occasion, and yet because Jim Corrigan had formed that psychic link between himself and her body 50 years ago, she simply could not die. And so Corrigan wanted to give Clarice a new lease on life and punish her wicked granddaughter by exchanging their bodies. So Clarissa, the granddaughter, found her soul inside Clarice's withering, decaying body, while Clarice found herself within her much younger granddaughter's healthy body. And it basically ended with Corrigan saying to Clarice, good luck to you. This is your chance for happiness. Goodbye. Well, with the desecration story arc, we get to see what happened next. And it turns out that when Nate Kane and other police officers enter Clarice's hospital room, Clarissa, who at this point is in Clarice's body, points a bony finger at Clarice in Clarissa's body and says, my son is innocent. He didn't try to kill me. It was my wicked granddaughter. And so the cuffs are put on Clarice/Clarissa, and she is taken away to jail. I'm sure this is not something which Jim Corrigan considered. You can certainly say this is one of those times where he really didn't think things through, really didn't try to access that part of him, which was the Spectre, to try to look forward and consider that Clarice, in her granddaughter's body, could certainly face a certain amount of trouble. Maybe Corrigan's assumption was that Kane and the other officers who were investigating would just jump to the conclusion that it was Clarice's son Douglas who had tried to kill her, and he would be put away. Now, at the same time, Asmodeus was back. Now, I've mentioned his name in previous parts of the Spectre run. He was popping up here and there, running interference. Madame Xanadu ran afoul of him, and Asmodeus plays a pretty major part in the desecration storyline. In fact, we get a pretty interesting origin story for Asmodeus, one that, come to think of it, Asmodeus never had a pre-crisis origin. It was simply that he was an evil parallel analog for the Spectre force. But here, Mr. Ostrander-Mandrake give us a really neat take on how Asmodeus was created. And for that, we're taken back to the time of Karaka, the first human host of the Spectre. In this great flashback sequence, we see Lord Shaitan on a conference call in the underworld with his other demon followers and saying, look at this. The Spectre is back. The Spectre is now bound to a human host. This isn't good for business. However, Jeten has a plan for what to do with the Spectre. Jeten takes one of his lieutenants, a woman snake hybrid named Succuba, and he sends her to Earth to sow seeds of despair in the Karaka hosted Spectre. And she's very good in her work. She manages to whisper several things into the Spectre / Karaka's ear, and it leads to Karaka losing complete faith in his mission as a host of the Spectre. And it's so paralyzing for the Spectre that in that moment, Jeten is actually able to separate Karaka from the Spectre. And so while the Spectre force goes back, presumably to be assigned to a new host, Jeten takes Karaka and Succuba and merges them to form Asmodeus. And then, over time, Asmodeus becomes one of Jeten's top lieutenants and goes out making deals with others in exchange for their shadows. So now here in the Desecration story arc, Asmodeus decides to create some chaos by intertwining himself in the lives of Clarice Winston, her son, and her granddaughter. Asmodeus returns to the Marchbank home where Clarissa and Clarissa's body has been returned and propped up as best as she can in bed, and Asmodeus appears before Clarice and says, "Okay, I know what the Spectre's done. Tell you what, in exchange for your shadow, I can restore this body that you found yourself in to its former youth, beauty, and vitality." And Clarissa accepts this, and to her father's astonishment, she turns back into the young, beautiful Clarice Winston. But it becomes pretty creepy over the course of a story arc, and that Clarissa / Clarice appears to be seducing her father / son. And of course, this is all Asmodeus wreaking havoc. Asmodeus isn't just out to wreak havoc on his one family. At one point, he actually takes the form of the CEO of a company, and he plants seeds of despair and chaos in the people who work at this company, and that gets Nate Kane and others on the force distracted. It's all part of a plan for Asmodeus in the present day to take down the Spectre once and for all. And there's a neat callback to showcase issue number 60, in that Asmodeus in his human form approaches Nate Kane with a gun and says, "It's the Spectre's doing. This is why there's all this chaos going on right now. But I've got this gun, and it's got these bullets, and if you manage to shoot the Spectre, it'll bring him down." And these are, of course, enchanted bullets. And so Nate Kane, much to his later regret, confronts the Spectre, shoots him, and ends up planting the seeds of despair in Jim Corrigan. And so much like Karaka went through his period of despair, so too does Jim Corrigan. And he once again finds himself paralyzed, struggling with his mission, just generally prepared to give it all up. And once again, it's Father Kramer who intervenes. And this time he says to Jim, "Okay, I know that your faith in humanity is completely gone, and you feel that there's nothing worth saving. But do what you did earlier.